What's up, y'all? Have you heard about the latest hit from the Second City? It's called The Devil is in the Detours, and it's being hailed as gutsy by the Tribune and another crackerjack cast of talented, charismatic performers, clearly creative and a joy to watch by the Sun-Times. That was very visual and descriptive. This is the Second City's 112th main stage review, and it's a hilarious and unhinged descent into a dimension where chaos reigns. The show runs Tuesdays through Sundays at the Second City in Old Town. Grab your tickets now at secondcity.com and go on and join the fun. Well, it looks like the DNC in Chicago just got more interesting with President Joe Biden dropping out of the race and endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. We'll have more in our roundup tomorrow, but in the meantime, in between time, head to our website, chicago.citycast.fm to catch up on the latest. Today on CityCast Chicago. If you've heard it once, you've heard it 1,000 times. Chicagoans are not very happy with the CTA. Problems with reliability, cleanliness, ridership, and now looming budget gaps further threaten the future of Chicagoland transit. As a result, lawmakers are considering merging CTA, Metra, and PACE into one regional transit body. There's a public hearing slated to happen this week in the South Burbs. Here's what we know so far about how the plan will work. It's Monday, July 22nd. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. Sarah Freistadt is a business reporter for the Chicago Tribune covering transportation. Last time Sarah was on the program, we talked about CTA running fewer buses and trains. And Sarah, we are happy to have you back to talk a potential regional merger. How are you feeling today?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing well. Back in April, you reported that Illinois lawmakers were proposing a potential merger between CTA, Metra, and PACE under one regional transportation agency. Can you tell us more about this plan and how it came to be?
Yeah. So like you said, the idea is to just have one agency instead of this like really chaotic and complicated agents or system that we have now. These agencies are staring down a huge fiscal cliff, and state lawmakers went to Chicago regional planners and said, help, like come up with some ideas. And this was one of the ideas that they came up with.
Obviously, a lot of departments across not only Chicago, but the state are trying to figure out innovative and creative ways to deal with what is running out of COVID relief money in so many different, at so many different levels. But this idea of a potential merger, is this new? Is this unique? Has this been floated before?
It is not new. One time that comes to mind is back in 2013, there were a lot of discussions about this. The head at that time of the RTA, which oversees all the transit agencies, he actually went to like a state task force and he said, look into this, look into consolidating. It didn't go anywhere at that time. But something that's a little different now is we do have this really, really big $730 million fiscal cliff that something's got to give, right? In one way, shape, or form. And also, like, there's kind of a lot of discontent right now with CTA and with the leadership of CTA. And that's maybe giving this idea some legs that it wouldn't otherwise have had.
We're going to get into that criticism of leadership, but I wanted to ask, we already have a regional transportation authority. What is the difference between that current body and what they do and what this body would do?
I think a lot of people are wondering that. So basically right now, the RTA primarily oversees finances. So they handle a lot of like each individual agency's budgets and helping to like coordinate federal funding sometimes in some ways. So the new agency would be a little stronger. It would be directly responsible. The way it's proposed now, if that happens, would be directly responsible for running buses and trains and bringing in money and spending money and, all of that.
So it would be more than a funding arm in some respects or a lobbying for funding arm. It'd be running the entire system, top to bottom, logistics, everything that comes with that.
That's the proposal. Something to
Right.
keep in mind is that, this is a proposal. So I think definitely worth keeping an eye on how these conversations progress, in Springfield, and what ultimately happens may or may not look like what was proposed. But yeah, that's the proposal at least.
You mentioned earlier the criticism that is often fueling this potential plan, particularly criticism around CTA President Dorval Carter, who even faced a proposal for his resignation in the city council. Governor J.B. Pritzker came out at one point and said there needed to be an evolution of leadership due to a decline in ridership since the pandemic, lack of reliable service on trains and buses, and as we've pointed out, this looming budget crisis as COVID funds are running out. Have there been any movements on potential leadership changes within CTA, and how would this merger help these transit issues?
Yeah, so I think, generally speaking, there's just kind of a lot of discontent. People are unhappy with how frequently the buses and trains are running, and with the conditions on buses and trains. And so, of course, Dorval Carter's really taking the brunt of that. He's kind of dug in on that criticism, and he pushed back a couple months ago at a city council hearing. He called the criticism racist and unfair, and said it was unfounded. My colleague Alice Yin and I reported a couple weeks ago that he's kind of embarked on this, a little bit of a publicity campaign among some state lawmakers to try to really show off CTA and drum up some support and raise awareness. So he's definitely pushing back on some of those criticisms.
Well, if we're not considering changing Dorval Carter, and the current proposal considers just maybe taking power away from CTA as we know it, how would a potential merger help these very transit issues that people are hoping new leadership could ultimately solve?
The people who are really advocating for this, they talk a lot about how convoluted the current system is. Currently there's, let me see if I remember these numbers. I think it's 47 different board members who are appointed by 21 elected officials across all of the, 4 different agencies: CTA, Metra, PACE, RTA. So that's a lot of people. That's a lot of politicians who have influence in different circles. There's a lot of people with suburban interests, people with city interests, state interests, all appointing people who are, reflecting those interests. So the proponents of this merger say that it would simplify the system, just make everybody work a little bit more closely together. That's what the proponents say. Opponents of this see the proposal really as an attempt to kind of strip control of CTA away from the city.
Yes.
And maybe there's a lot of city suburban angst as part of this, and who's going to come out with more power, and a lot of that playing out.
Speaking of, if what seems to largely be driving this is criticism around CTA, how would Metra and PACE be impacted? And are they facing similar leadership questions, ridership concerns?
Definitely all of the agencies are facing ridership concerns. Ridership is just down. People have not come back to public transit of any type. CTA has really taken the brunt of the criticism. CTA is also the biggest of the transit agencies. It serves more people. Metra, for example, historically has always been very commuter focused, whereas CTA historically has served commuters, but also people just trying to get around the city, get to family, friends, school, whatever. CTA has a little bit of a different type of ridership. And so, yeah, it's really borne the brunt of the criticism here.
When leaders sat down in front of lawmakers, whether it was CTA leaders, Metra, or PACE, how do they feel about this potential merger?
My colleagues in Block Club had a great way of describing that hearing where they all sat down. They said the leaders of all the different agencies came together to say, "Don't bring us together." So basically, all of the heads of the transit agencies say we should not be combined, we should not be merged, but they do want some more money. They do want more state funding. So they're sitting around saying, give us money, but don't merge us. Whereas some of the lawmakers and some advocates and civic thinkers are saying, well, if you want more money, reform, there has to be some type of reform. That's the conversation.
How are other city officials, I mean, even everyday riders, responding to a potential merger?
That kind of remains to be seen, maybe. Certainly, there are advocates who are really unhappy with CTA leadership, who are really strongly advocating for this. But I think also for your everyday rider, they're mostly just concerned about, like, is my bus or train going to show up? Am I going to feel safe? Is it going to be clean? Is it going to get me where I need to go? And that's really top of mind. So, like, until the conversation kind of gets to that point of, like, affecting everyday service and everyday riders, it's a little hard to tell.
Speaking of everyday service, we last spoke in October. Has service improved? Have we seen more buses and more trains be scheduled? Have we seen hiring improvements? These exact things that people are criticizing Dorval Carter for, have we seen changes in now the 9 months since we last spoke?
Well, there's some good news and some bad news on that front. As always. The short answer is yes. CTA has added back bus service. They have started to add back train service. So really, for the first time since big service cuts happened in the middle of the pandemic, this spring was really the first time CTA started to add back service. And so, that's great news. Not every bus route has seen increases in service. There's a lot of bus routes, and that's been kind of rolling out over time. So not every bus rider is going to see those improvements. And on the train side, yes, they have started to add back service. There was a little blip earlier this spring where there was some talk of adding back train service. It didn't happen when people thought it was going to happen. There was some angst about that. But just last week, we heard from CTA that they have started to add back train service. So, things are not where they were before the pandemic, but, they're better than they were in October, at least on paper, theoretically. Now, one thing to remember is that Dorval Carter has promised to restore train service to pre-pandemic levels by the end of this year. So that is definitely, like, a very key kind of benchmark that, as we're talking about leadership, certainly I'm keeping my eye on.
Are we on track?
Well, there are advocates who do not think we're on track. I am taking kind of a wait and see approach. Hard to predict what this, CTA staffing levels, what might happen with that, whether they're getting enough people in the door, whether people are staying in the door, right?
Yeah.
And that's all key to adding back service. So we'll see.
While it seems these transit agencies don't want to merge, it doesn't mean they don't work together. Last month, a day pass that would allow riders to use among all three transit agencies was proposed. How would that impact riders in the agencies, and have there been any updates on the proposal?
Yeah, so that day pass, again, could be used across CTA, Metro, and PACE. It has been approved by all the agencies. So now it's just a matter of, like, getting it up and running, which they say should happen in the next couple months. But yeah, super interesting that you bring that up, because that's always one of the big symbols of, all these different agencies we have, right? That's one of the things people talk about is, like, well, why can't we just have one fare that I can use if I'm taking Metro into the city and then I want to hop on CTA to, like, get the last leg of my journey? Why can't I just pay the same fare?
There are also big gaps across the city, we obviously know, in public transit. And so in some cases, like, I'm thinking if I'm coming from the southeast side, I might hop on a Metro into downtown and then hop on, like, the blue line to get to the northwest side. And so I'm often using these things in conjunction with one another. Exactly.
And, that's something the agencies say they all work together and try to coordinate. But, like, ultimately, they're just different agencies. They have different systems. And so one of the like really tangible things that people talk about with consolidating agencies is consolidating fares. So making that simpler. Again, there's a lot of, like, back end things that have to happen to to make that work, a lot of technology and things like that.
Right.
So not like that's going to happen overnight, but that day pass that you mentioned was really a big step in that direction, I think.
Well, I would love to see that. I mean, we got Metra in the same app as CTA. And so hopefully we can bring those things into more of a conversation with each other. When can we expect a decision on a potential merger?
So this is a legislative decision down in Springfield. The legislature is out of session right now. They'll come back briefly in the fall for a veto session. But then other than that, we have to wait for session to start up. But, these are really like big discussions and kind of a heavy lift in Springfield. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight. You mentioned these hearings that are ongoing that are related to all this. I know there's like a whole bunch of those that are going to be happening over the next couple months. And then we'll have to have some conversations about, right, do lawmakers move forward with this proposal to outright consolidate them all? Or is there going to be some kind of compromise middle ground that's going to happen?
With such a, I think, historic potential merger, is there any place for the Chicagoland to look at, for an example, any other major cities of our size or comparable size done something like this where they're merged city services, regional services, and kind of put that authority in the hands of the state?
Yeah. So two thoughts come to mind. One is Philadelphia, where they have one system that runs. They have a whole bunch of different types of transit, but I believe it includes subways, trolleys, commuter trains, buses. That's all overseen by an agency called CTA. And then the other one that comes to mind is New York. The MTA is the agency that oversees the commuter trains, the subway, the buses, and then kind of under the MTA, they have, like the section that handles subways, the section that handles, the different commuter trains, things like that. Obviously, New York is like transit central, so it's a very interesting one to keep an eye on. Chicago has some unique political considerations and logistical considerations, but certainly it's not a crazy out there idea that's never happened before.
What is the likelihood? Again, it's been proposed before, but have we seen our transit agencies facing this level of, I don't know if vulnerability is the right word, but is concern, the leadership level, financial level? Is it more likely or less likely that it happens this time around?
The transit agencies have faced financial problems before. This is really like, the financial problems now are really, really bad. Right. Yeah. $730 million fiscal cliff. That's pretty bad. So that is not unprecedented, but like a little bit worse than usual, a lot worse than usual. So yeah, there definitely are some factors this time around that are different than what has happened in the past. But I don't know, this isn't the first like crisis that our public transit agencies have faced.
This is one potential solution, and lawmakers will consider others, but the problem is very clear. $730 million fiscal cliff is on the horizon. Can you put that into like practical terms for people listening? They hear that and they're like, what does that mean? Does that mean like buses and trains will just shut down? Services will automatically be cut? Fares will double or triple? What could that mean for us as riders?
So this $730 million fiscal cliff is about 20% of the region's budgets. So that's, it's almost a quarter of their budget would be like disappearing. And yeah, that the fear is that could translate into drastic service cuts, fare increases. Regional planners say that it's actually too big of a gap to like cut our way out of. But yeah, that's what failure to plug that hole, the agencies would have to cut service. They'd have to raise fares. And then, the fear is that could lead to a transit doom spiral where service is so bad, it's so expensive, no one takes it. That makes the agencies lose more money, so they cut some more, et cetera, et cetera. That's definitely a worst case scenario, but yeah, that's kind of what we're staring down.
And so in a merger, what are the things that would be cut to kind of make up at least a little bit of that gap? Does that mean, okay, I guess we don't need CEOs of three different, so does that just mean we're reducing personnel essentially?
So that, again, all of these details that need to be worked out. But the Civic Federation has estimated that there could be some real significant cost savings to merging all the agencies. They put the savings between $200 million and $250 million annually just from merging the agencies. But that being said, they were also a little bit sketchy on the details of where that money would come from. So unclear. And then there's also like some additional costs and logistical challenges that come with merging. Like, every agency has their own pension system with their own pension debt and their own other, general debt, their own labor contracts. So there would be some costs to figuring out how to merge all that together.
How important is it not only for our transit agencies to work together, but to restore that pre-pandemic levels, especially when you've reported Chicago is seeing the second worst traffic in the country, I think for the second year in a row. And I imagine some of the people are on the road driving are people who lost confidence in public transit and haven't returned. I mean, just why is it so important that these agencies, again, work together and we start to restore these services?
Chicago doesn't work without public transit. You mentioned the increase in traffic, right? I've interviewed people, I've talked to people who went out and bought cars because they used to be avid transit riders and then just felt like it couldn't get them where they needed to go. So they bought a car, they started driving. And I mean, if every single person got in a car and never took public transit, you just wouldn't be able to get anywhere in the city at all. Or really across the rest of the region also. Traffic would be out of control. And just like all of the kind of things that make living in a city fun, right? The neighborhoods, the vibes of all the different neighborhoods, all of the local stores, like all of that relies on people walking around and interacting with their city. And transit is such a great way to get people to really like interact with the city, right? So that's one thing. But then there's also like people who can't afford to buy a car and who still need to get to work, to school, to medical care, to family. All of that, we need transit to make that work.
I just want to give another huge thank you to business reporter for the Chicago Tribune, Sarah Freistadt. Sarah, thank you for making time for us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
As of now, there's a public hearing on the transit merger slated to happen Wednesday morning in the South Burbs. But as of now, a specific location has not been announced. You can check the link in our show notes to find the latest updates. Make sure you bookmark our website, chicago.citycast.fm. There you'll find more headlines, a packed events calendar, neighborhood guides, and you can subscribe to our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago. Something you can only find on the podcast, some good news. I've got 2 great free park events for you today, including Broadway in your backyard at Washington Park tonight from 6 to 7 and the Full Moon Jam at Foster Beach from 7 to 10. For more Park District events, check the link in our show notes. And again, remember, our events calendar is live and constantly updating at chicago.citycast.fm. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Peace.